You know what? I know it is Thursday, and we should be cruising happily into the end of the week. But guess what? I am pretty annoyed. Angry, even. Why? Well, quite simply because I think we now finally have the proof that Anthony Albanese's much vaunted voice to Parliament, which the Prime Minister says alternately is about good manners, just pure and simple, in other words, something that is entirely symbolic, or on other days of the week, he says it's about achieving better outcomes, in other words, something with teeth. Well, is it really just about, in fact, securing his legacy and having a feather in his cap for the history books? I think so. In other words, Anthony Albanese, we now have proof, has been gaslighting us all along. Now, I know what you're probably thinking. Come on, Morrow. Didn't you know this already? Well, sure, of course. I mean, that was always the suspicion with this. But frankly, it has never been as blatant as it is now. Yesterday, we heard the news that Indigenous leaders wanted 6 months, assuming the referendum returns a yes vote, to come up with a workable model for how the thing is supposed to act in practice. Well, that's bad enough. But now, that plan appears to have the endorsement of the federal government. Today, we woke to the news that Indigenous Affairs Minister Linda Burney, whose entire gig is supposed to be about consulting with the very same Indigenous people The Voice is supposed to consult with, well, she's backed in this idea. Revealed in the Australian, Linda Burney said that she now can't even guarantee that if the yes vote comes back yes, they will even have a voice up and running by the next election. Asked whether the voice would not be operational until after possibly 2025, Miss Burney said, "I won't say yes or no. That is the decision of the working group. And I will not get ahead of the working group," she said. "It is absolutely fundamental to how we move, at what speed we move. And it is a group of very prominent Indigenous people that has been working on the issue of Indigenous constitutional reform for some of them most of their long life." I'm sorry. What? People have been working on this idea for most of their lives, according to Burney. Yet they don't have something ready to go in the event they actually win this thing? And it could still be being kicked around when Australians next go to the polls, which, by the way, my money says will be before Christmas 2024 and not sometime in 2025. I wonder what the PM thinks about this. I mean, after all, he has repeatedly said that the Langton-Calmer report contains all the details we need to make a decision and implement a voice. Though, of course, tellingly, he has not actually gone and said, yes, this is the model, have a look. Now, I'm sorry. I thought that this was a matter of great urgency. And considering the speed and indeed haste with which this government has rammed through everything from IR legislation for their big union mates to climate legislation for everyone looking to make a buck off green energy, well, if I was an Indigenous Australian, I might be a bit insulted. I mean, really. How big a super fund do you need to control to get something done around here, honestly? Meanwhile, the Greens continue to be the no case's best asset. I'm not just talking about Greens Indigenous Affairs spokeswoman and Harley-Davidson ambassador Lydia Thorpe. Remember, Thorpe's big gripe is that the government should pursue a treaty with Indigenous people first, before a voice. A treaty, of course, is the second step called for in the Uluru Statement, which the Prime Minister has promised to implement in full. Greens leader Adam Bant told the ABC in regard to a treaty that the issue of sovereignty is, quote, something that has been raised as an issue by a number of First Nation groups for some time, and this goes back a number of years. This question about what does it mean to have First Nation sovereignty properly recognized in this country, because that is, of course, the forerunner to having a treaty in this country. Well, thank you, Mr. Bant. Appreciate your words there, because he's done what I've been trying to do here all along, which is to remind people that a yes vote isn't just about good manners, as Anthony Albanese says, or, as many others suggest, creating a separate and extra way for people of just one race to be able to make representations to Parliament in defiance of centuries of Enlightenment tradition that has actually sought to get us away from precisely that sort of thing. Because it is indeed also about treaty, sovereignty, and the potential for all sorts of new rights to accrue to people simply on the basis of their race. I mean, already we have seen just one example of this: Indigenous groups in New South Wales making claims that have led to the banning of climbing the popular Mount Warning tourist attraction. Just look across the ditch to all the trouble that has led to New Zealand for them from their treaty, Google co-governance, and Three Waters, if you want to get a sense of it. It is no wonder, then, that polls are showing declining support for the voice. But I think, to give Anthony Albanese some credit, this decline in support isn't necessarily because he's done a dud job selling it. It is because people are looking at the product and realizing that, as nice and warm and fuzzy an idea as it may be, at heart, the voice itself is a dud.